tell, then you see the road. I'm to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of What If Harry Potter Meets Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. But not for long. The blue-haired guy, who came alongside Esther and Lilith, smirked at those words as he stepped forward. That's because you are old, pal. Ignoring the fake annoyed glare sent his way, the blue-haired man turned his head to look at Harry with a friendly smile. I'm Adam, a pleasure to meet you, little guy. A pleasure, sir, Harry responded shyly but still tried to show a strong face. Adam chuckled as he ruffled the boy's hair, earning himself a protesting whine from Harry, before entering the house just as his wife approaching our young hero. My! Such a gentleman, Esther cooed teasingly to Harry, who blushed slightly at those words as he looked at his feet in embarrassment. Giggling at his shy behavior, the succubus then led her family inside, following Graphia and her own family as they entered the dining room where they met up with Jaya, who just came out of the kitchen. Welcome to my humble home, everyone. Please make yourself comfortable. Dinner is almost ready, the Jinko greeted her guests with a warm smile. Thank you for having us, my friend, Graphia said back gently to Jaya as the two shared a hug. When the griffin pulled away, Esther took her place in hugging the Jinko. It had been a long time since we had a lunch together, the succubus whispered in Jaya's ears with a smile. Indeed, the Jinko whispered back with a chuckle before she pulled herself away from Esther. Do you know when Lana and Rosie are coming? Well, they will be here right about, the succubus began to say before stopping when the doorbell rang again. Now. Jaya shot the succubus a look before sighing as she looked toward Harry, who was chatting with his friends. Graphia, Haven, Gerald, Haruto, and Adam were also chatting with one another, while Gerald and Adam were, even if Haruko couldn't speak, while Hellhound and the Griffin was keeping an eye on the kids. Harry dear. Can you see who is it? Jaya inquired her son with a smile as Esther went to sit with her husband. Yes, Mom, the young boy said to the Jinko, sending an apologetic look toward Gabrielle, Hella and Lilith, before rushing toward the front door. Opening it, Harry's eyes widened when he saw who it was, Lana the Lamia, Rosie the Holstor, along with Edna and a young man who looked to be around 19 years old or more, with dark brown hair, ice blue eyes and a muscular body. He was not as tall as Gerald, but it was close. Hello. Welcome, he greeted the newcomers with a smile before yelping when he found himself being picked up by a certain Lamia. Hello, cutie. I missed you so much, Lana cooed at him while kissing his face repeatedly. I missed you too, Miss Lana, the young boy replied back softly, which earned him an ah and a kiss on the nose before she putted him down. Hello, little one, Rosie said as she looked at him with a warm smile. Hi, Miss Rosie. Harry greeted her back with a smile and a wave. The Holstor smiled wider and nodded her head before ruffling his hair with a hand. The young dark-haired child giggled at the action before looking at the other two-person present. Hi, Miss Edna. Hi, sir. Hello, dear, the worm greeted him gently as she bent down to kiss his forehead. Hello, young Harry. I'm Waylon and I'm Edna's husband, the man, now known as Waylon, greeted him gently in a friendly manner. Hi, Mr. Waylon, Harry greeted back with a respectful nod. You're a fine lad, Waylon commented with a chuckle as he gave a sideway glance at his wife, who shot him a toothy smirk in response. Smiling at the praise, Harry then seemed to remember the main reason he was there in the first place and quickly stepped aside, saying respectively, Please come in. Dinner is almost ready. Lana and Rosie smiled warmly at him and entered the house, soon followed by Edna and her husband. Harry watched them disappearing at the corner as they entered the dining room where Mother will surely welcome them. Barely a second later, he could hear happy words being exchanged. He was about to join them when the doorbell rang again, alerting him that someone was at the other side. Harry, once again, opened the door to see who it was. "Hello," he greeted them before pausing when he saw who it was. Paralis was there along with Cyrilla, and behind them, stood their parents. Paralis' mom looked like her daughter but was yellow in appearance instead of red. The man beside her, who looked to be in his 30s, had red hair and blue eyes. He was tall but not as much as some of the men currently in the house, and was not very muscular. He had a beard and looked more like an inventor than a fighter. As for Cyrilla, it was easy to see that her mother looked just like her, and the man beside her looked to be around 25 years old at most, with blonde hair and green eyes. Unlike the other man, this guy was short but more toned and had a trimmed mustache instead of a beard. "Hey Harry," Paralis and Cyrilla greeted him at the same time with friendly waves. "So you are the famous Harry Potter? You are way cuter than I expected," Cyrilla's mother commented with a tiny smirk. Harry, hearing this, blushed madly and turned his head away in amusement, which caused the girls to smirk or giggle in amusement. "I heard you could speak the great tongue, is it true?" the yellow wyvern asked him inquisitively. "Yes ma'am," Harry replied in Parseltongue. The wyvern and the adult chimera blinked in surprise at this and looked at him with wide eyes and pleasure. "Interesting. Well, Paralis, you made a fine choice indeed," the yellow wyvern said to her daughter with a teasing smirk. Paralis blushed madly and whined loudly, "Mother." Our young hero frowned in confusion as he didn't understand what she meant by this statement. A fine choice of what? Him being her friend? Or what is something else? Shaking his head, he decided to ask his mother later. Smirking at her daughter, the yellow wyvern looked back at Harry with a smile. "My name's Wanda, little one, a pleasure to meet you." "And I'm Jackson, Paralis' father," the inventor-like man replied in a calm but deep tone. "A pleasure to meet you ma'am, sir," our hero retorted in a soft tone and a bow of his head. The two parents nodded back at him before he allowed them to pass. Paralis refused to meet his eyes as her face was as red as a tomato. Now he really wanted to see his mother, as he was really confused right now. However, he quickly looked back at Cyrilla and her parents, whose eyes hadn't left him one bit. "When our daughter said you could speak the languages of serpents, I admit I was a bit skeptical, but after witnessing it with my own eyes, I have to apologize for doubting her word," the blonde-haired man said in a calm tone, even if we could hear the shame in it. "You don't need to apologize to me sir," Harry protested softly while shaking his head. "Please call me Carl," the blonde man demanded him in a gentle tone, and our young hero nodded at him. But then he blinked as he remembered something Carl said not long ago. And looked at Cyrilla, who quickly turned her head to look away with a red face. "She told you," he whispered softly with disbelief, but it was loud enough to be heard. "Yes she did dear," Cyrilla's mother said in a sympathetic tone. "Even about M-, Harry began to say in growing fear. "Yes she did," Carl answered somberly. A long silence followed as Harry stared at Cyrilla with betrayal while the young chimera shot him an apologetic look. However, before he could say anything to her, Cyrilla's mother, whose name was still unknown, stepped in. "I'm sorry you had to endure such a hardship at such a young age." Harry merely nodded, not saying anything. His past was still a touchy subject to him after all. While he mostly grew out of it, he didn't like talking about it as it reminded him of far too many nightmares. "Well, how about we all get in?" Carl asked out in an attempt to break the awkward silence. "Oh, where are my manners?" "I am Claire," Cyrilla's mother said gently to Harry as she petted the top of his head with a hand scratched at, with a paw. "Nice to meet you Miss Claire," Harry responded in a really soft tone. With a smile, the mature chimera gently picked him up before using her right hand, the dragon-like one, to turn his head to look at her. "Don't be ashamed of your past, little one, because nothing was of your doing. The past is the past. Now you must focus on the future, because the future is what you decide it to be," Claire told the young boy in a calm tone. Harry looked at her with stars in his emerald green eyes before nodding his head in understanding. Smiling, the mature chimera gave him a little kiss on the forehead which caused him to blush before putting him down. Then she and her husband entered the house, leaving behind their daughter and Harry. "Why?" he asked her in a soft tone. The young chimera stayed silent for a moment before looking at him in the eyes. "They were curious of who you were," Cyrilla 3 explained in a soft tone. "Don't be angry at us alone, pal. I think the other girls also told their parents." Cyrilla 2 added with a shrug. "But why?" Harry asked her with confusion. "We also did it because we all wanted to give you as much protection as possible and comfort as well," Cyrilla 1 answered in her powerful tone. Hearing this, our young hero felt like his heart was beating faster, and without warning, he threw himself at the young chimera, who blinked in shock as she felt his arms wrapping around her neck. "Thank you," he whispered into her ears. Cyrilla, despite blushing at the gesture, smiled tenderly at him before returning the gesture. For a moment the two of them stayed like this, but then they heard someone clearing its throat and turned around to see Reina. The yellow Ryu was standing a few feet away from them with a small smile on her face, and behind her stood a large Ryu that looked like an older version of her but with different colors. Green scales and hair instead of yellow, and golden eyes instead of sky blue. The two of them, Harry noticed, were alone, as they were no man with them. This mean Reina's father wasn't here. Blushing madly once they realized they had been seen hugging one another, Cyrilla quickly rushed away, leaving Harry alone with the two Ryus. The young hero blinked at the chimera's sudden departure and turned toward the two newcomers, who looked at him with a smile on their faces. "Welcome to my home," he greeted them shyly with a little bow. From what he read, people from the East tended to show respect by bowing to the waist, and in an attempt to not offend them, he did just that. Reina giggled at his action as she approached him to pull him into a gentle embrace. "Hello, Harry." "Hi," he replied back softly with his face a bit red. "Harry, meet my mother Rurika, the representative of the East in the High Council." The last part was still in a brilliantly hidden smirk she sent her mother. Hearing this, Harry's eyes widened in shock as he suddenly bowed in respect for the older Ryu. Rurika shot a fake look of annoyance toward her daughter before looking down at him with a humble smile. "Rise, little one. Any friends of my daughter are friends of mine." Her voice sounded like honey. It filled his entire being with comfort and warmth. "But you are in the council, I have to show you respect." Harry objected before putting his hands on his mouth with a look of horror on his face. He talked back to a member of the High Council. However, instead of sermoning him, the Ryu laughed in amusement before bending over to ruffle the top of his head. "And I wholeheartedly respect that, darling. However, as you are a friend of my daughter, you are free to be familiar with me as well," Rurika cooed to the little boy before shooting a look toward her daughter, adding, "especially if you are about to become a member of the family." Hearing this, Harry blinked in confusion while Reina spluttered in indignation as her face looked like a giant tomato. Rurika laughed in amusement at the two children before turning her head when she heard someone approaching them. "Harry, sweetie, why are you still out?" Jaya began to ask her son before stopping when her orange eyes landed on the two Ryus standing next to her son, but particularly on the oldest one. "Lady Rurika," the Jinko cried out in surprise before bowing at her respectfully. "Rise, my dear, are you this little one's guardian?" Rurika asked Jaya with a small smile. "Yes, milady, Harry is my son," the Jinko answered with a warm smile toward our young hero, who smiled back at her in response. "You are lucky to have him, my dear. This little one has the purest soul I have ever seen," the Ryu told Jaya with a smile toward Harry, who turned his head away with a blush on his face. "I know, he is the sweetest, humblest and most adorable darling ever," the Jinko answered with a toothy grin toward our young hero, who blushed even more at the words of his adoptive mother. "From what I saw so far and how my beloved daughter spoke of him, I'm inclined to agree with you, my dear." Rurika's words caused both children to blush madly, much to the amusement of their respective mothers. "Please, milady, follow me into the dining room. Dinner must be ready by now," the Jinko said respectively to the Ryu, who nodded her head with a smile before the little group of four entered the house to meet up with the rest of the guests. Time skip. The next hour was simply interesting to say the least. Many compliments were given to both Jaya and Harry for their cooking, as every single guest liked the food. The adults got to talk about many serious things while the kids were more carefree, speaking about how they would do after dinner and how they should pass the night together. But then, a special topic entered the conversation, a topic concerning one of the children which also happened to be the only human of the group. Harry James Potter. Jaya wasn't really surprised by the fact everyone present knew of his past, as apparently Harry had told his friends who had told them. After sending the children off, the Jinko, with the help of Esther and Lana, slowly began to speak more of Harry's past. Once she finished, the result was easy to guess. Many voices their thoughts about the way he was raised, and all the men wanted to find this Vernon Dursley to give him a taste of his own medicine. Translation: beating him into a pulp. Claire, Rurika, Edna, Wanda, Haven and Rosie were all angry at this woman, Petunia, who tortured her own nephew because of her petty jealousy over her sister. But all of them were even more furious about this man, Albus Dumbledore. Esther told everyone the man's last word to Harry before he was left on a doorstep in winter, and everyone females except the succubus, Lana, Graphia and Jaya looked ready to kill something. A clap of thunder echoed outside as Rurika's eyes were hidden by her hair. A growl escaped Haven's throat as she bared her teeth like an angry hound. Wanda looked ready to spit fire as some flames looked ready to leak out of her mouth. Claire looked ready to tear something as her eyes showed nothing but pure fury. Edna was hissing angrily as her eyes narrowed in anger. The men were no better as some of them cracked their knuckles, ready to punch something. After a long discussion, it was decided that Harry needed more protectors, and many of the parents present offered their supports. The young man needed as much help as possible, and if those people dared to show their faces again, they will all be ready to deal with them. Not only that, but every Momono present decided to become Harry's official protectors until he will be old enough to defend himself, or until their daughters will be strong enough to defend him from harm. Harry, as he played with his friend, didn't know what was going on in the dining room and didn't know what life had in store for him. Earth, Scotland, summer 1991. Many miles to the north in the Scottish Highlands, in the great castle known as Hogwarts, stupid name I know, an old man was thinking deeply as a grin filled with anticipation could be seen on his bearded face. Why? Because soon, Albus Dumbledore, defeater of Grindelwald, winner of the Order of Merlin First Class, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the ICW, and Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry will see the start of his plans coming into motion. A decade ago, he had placed Harry James Potter with people who hated him for being a wizard, and thanks to the charms he placed alongside the BLD wards, the old man was sure that the boy was abused to the point he will be nothing but a malleable child who would do as he asked. A part of the boy's lifestyle, Albus Dumbledore had also planned several others things. Such as sending him Hagrid so the half-giant would brainwash the boy by saying Albus was the greatest wizard alive and that Slytherin were all evil. Then he made sure the brat would choose the brother wand of the Dark Lord by placing some charm on it. He will also help the brat finding the platform 9 3/4 by having one of his followers Molly Weasley yelling it while at the train station. He had also planned for Molly's youngest son, Ron, to befriend him on the train so he could again brainwash the boy into thinking that Gryffindor was the best house and Slytherin were evil. He had also used a confundus charm on the Sorting Hat so he would place the boy who lived in the house he had chosen for him, in short, Gryffindor. After that, the old man had planned to test the boy so he could prepare him for his final confrontation against Tom. Of course, Albus doesn't plan to train the boy at all, but merely to forge him into a perfect martyr who would do everything to save the wizarding world, even sacrificing himself for them all. Soon Harry Potter will return in our world. However, his thoughts were interrupted by someone barging into his office with a look of panic on her face. It was none other than his deputy headmistress, Minerva McGonagall, the head of Gryffindor House. Albus frowned when he noticed the look on her face and couldn't help but feeling dread inside. "Minerva? What happened to make you so upset?" he asked in a grandfatherly tone before adding. "You are not normally one to be so rattled without good reason." "Albus. We have a problem and it concerns Harry Potter," Minerva answered in a panicked tone. Hearing this, Dumbledore lost his grandfatherly concern as he quickly ushered her to a chair across from his desk, conjured tea for both of them. Now Minerva, take deep breaths and explain, he inquired her in a calm tone, but it was filled with internally dread. You know, Albus, I was checking the last letters for the owls to send to our students. Imagine my dismay when I saw that none of them were destined to Harry Potter. I then checked the register and his name was not there, the old woman began to say in a voice thick with concern and worry. Dumbledore was panicking now. Such a thing usually never happened except during two special circumstances. Either the student was dead or if the student had applied for another magical school. In the old man's head, both outcomes were simply impossible. However, his internal panic was cut short by Minerva as she spoke again. Albus, what does this mean? Minerva asked him with nothing but pure concern for the boy who lived. Shaking his head to regain his composure, the old man turned his bearded face to stare at his deputy headmistress with a serious expression on his face. I'm glad you came to me, Minerva, Albus began to say in a tone filled with genuine worry while he jumped on his feet to walk toward another section of his office where silvery gadgets were. What were they? All of them monitored the wards around number 4, Privet Drive, the Dursley residence, along with the health of the boy and the Horcrux in his head. Minerva didn't know about the last one as the old man hid it from her. As he approached them, he saw that all of them looked normal, showing that Harry was fine, healthy and still at Privet Drive, but then the moment he stepped a bit too close to them they changed. Much to Albus' horror, the device monitoring the wards was destroyed. But not only that, several other gadgets as well were destroyed. How? When? He mumbled to himself in shock, as behind him Minerva looked just as stunned. By Merlin. What happened? The deputy headmistress asked him in shock as her eyes didn't look away from the destroyed device. I don't know, Minerva, but we need to go see the Dursleys now. Dumbledore roared in panic as he disappeared in a crack-like sound, quickly followed by a worried Minerva. Fawkes, the phoenix and familiar of the old coot, thrilled in amusement at what just occurred as he thought that it was finally time for the old man to be humiliated. Unknown to them all, an old entity was laughing to her heart content as she knew things would be interesting now. Now, for the next part of my plan, she muttered to herself with a somewhat mad cackle before disappearing to go elsewhere. Mysteria, Jaya's house. At the same time, in the fantastic world of Mysteria, an important event was taking place. Harry was sitting on a chair with a strange hat on his head as before his very eyes, stood a very large chocolate cake with candles on it. All around him, also wearing pointy hats, stood his mother Jaya the Jinko, her husband and his adoptive father Jason, who she met 4 years ago, his baby sister Jane, who was a Jinko like her mother, his friends Gabrielle the Griffin, Lilith the Succubus, Paralis the Wyvern, Cyrilla the Chimera, Raina the Ryu, Hela the Hellhound, their parents, Lana, Rosie and finally, Edna the Worm and her little family. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, Harry. Happy birthday to you. Yeah. They all chanted with bright smiles on their faces before cheering him loudly as he blew his candles. Yes, it was his birthday and Harry was turning 11. 5 years had passed since he was found and adopted by the nice Jinko Jaya, and so many things happened. Among them was the fact his beloved mom found her husband. His name was Jason like it was said above, and he was a nice guy in his early 30s with black hair and kind blue eyes. Jason didn't seem to mind that his wife already had a kid and instead, had wholeheartedly accepted Harry as his own. The young boy had great times with the man and he will cherish them forever. Another thing that happened was the birth of Edna's little ones, 3 to be precise, and they were absolute darlings. They all looked like their mothers and Harry grew to love them all and the feeling was mutual. What was their names? Winnie, Melody and Selena. Then another thing happened, the birth of his sister Jane. She was born almost a year after his mother and father got together, and the little one had been an adorable baby. Much to everyone's surprise, her first words when she was old enough to speak was neither Mama or Papa, but Harry. Our young hero had been delighted by this and had swore to protect his baby sister to the end. Jane, for her part, was an absolute dear, but she was much more mischievous than her parents. She seemed to like pranks and jokes, and sometimes, she would use them on her family and sometimes with the help of her big brother. Speaking of which, as the years passed, Harry grew out of his shell and was no more nervous and shy around people. But what hadn't changed was his humble and polite nature. Many girls liked his behavior and how chivalric he acted sometimes toward everyone. His friends were all annoyed by it sometimes, as they could see that whenever they went out with him, many momonos would look at him like a piece of meat, especially when he spoke in his gentle and noble-like tone. While they all knew he wasn't doing this on purpose, it still annoyed them. Gabrielle, Lilith, Paralis, Cyrilla, Hella and Reina all grew possessive of him, as they all knew they had a crush on him. Their mothers had given them the talk and they all understood that Harry was the one of them. At first they fought about who should be his real wife, but then, they made an agreement to share him. After all, knowing Harry, he would love them all equally. Back to present, Harry smiled at his family as they cheered at him. "Thank you everyone," he whispered to them with a soft smile. Jaya, his mother, smiled warmly at him before kissing the top of his head. "Anything for you, son," she whispered gently into his ears as the Jinko pulled her head away from him. Jason gave him a thumb up, which he returned with a smile. But then, Harry's emerald eyes landed on the third member of his little family, whose orange eyes shined as she looked up at him while handing him a somewhat big present. "Happy birthday, big brother," the little Jinko cried out to her brother with a bright smile. Smiling tenderly at his sibling, he patted her gently on the head and Jane leaned against the touch, purring softly. Ironically, she looked like a kitten craving for affection. "Thank you, little one," Harry replied in a kind brotherly tone, which caused Jane to give him a little hug, to which he returned without hesitation. Many people present looked at one another with smirks on their faces. Jane had Harry wrapped in her little fingers. Lana even cooed at the sight as, beside her, Rosie shot her boss and friend an amused glance. Jaya and Jason, for their parts, looked at their children with warm smiles on their faces, as they knew the two loved each other. Harry would do everything for his sister, and in return, Jane would do everything to make her brother happy. Speaking of the little Jinko. "Now open your present, Potter," Jane called out with slight excitement once she pulled herself away from him. "Yes. Open them." 3 little worms by the names of Winnie, Melody and Selena cried out in agreement to Jane's words. Laughter echoed barely a second later, although Edna was giving a fake stern look at her daughters, who looked anything but repentant if the smirks the trio had on their faces were any indications. "Well, you heard the girls. Let's open the presents," Harry called out with a chuckle, which caused some snickers to escape some people when the little ones cheered loudly for his decision. However, before our hero had the chance to open his first present, something unexpected took place. "I hope you won't mind if I step in," a feminine voice echoed from nearby, which caught everyone's attention. Turning their heads toward where the voice came from, they all watched in amazement as someone appeared in thin air in the house. The newcomer was an appealing young woman with long hair who was wearing what looked like a priestess outfit. Much to their shock, her body was transparent and her eyes shined in a bright light. At the sight of her, many mothers, Graphia, Edna, Jaya, Haven, Wanda and Claire, instantly pulled the children closer to them, while their husbands glared at the newcomer with suspicion clear in their eyes. Lana was hissing threateningly while Rosie looked like a raging bull. Harry and the rest of the young ones were looking at the newcomer in slight fear, wondering who she was, even if she was an appealing woman. But then our heroes saw something strange. Rurika, Reina's mother and Esther were pale as if they just saw a ghost. But then, much to everyone's shock, they quickly bowed at the intruder. Before anyone could ask them what they were doing and why, the succubus looked back at the newcomer before saying respectfully, "Lady Magic, you honor us with your presence." At those words, everyone present quickly did the same once they realized that they were facing one of the entities who created their world. The youngest people present, however, were staring at the ghostly woman in amazement as stars could be seen shining in their eyes. "Rise everyone, you do not need to bow before me," Lady Magic gently told them with a warm smile. Hearing this, one by one, everyone slowly straightened up before facing the deity with nothing but respect shining in their eyes. After all, it wouldn't be good for them to insult someone who could easily wipe them out. My lady, may we know the reason of your presence here on Mysteria? Rurika inquired calmly to the entity of magic with nothing but pure respect. You may. A little smirk graced her feature as Lady Magic looked at the Ryu. For a moment, nothing could be heard until Esther decided to break the silence. Then can we know? Please, she asked her in soft but still respectful tone and filled with curiosity. The succubus flinched slightly when Lady Magic looked at her with a straight face, and many started to sweat nervously, thinking that Esther was about to be punished harshly, only to blink in surprise when the entity spoke calmly. I am here for him. At the last part, Lady Magic was looking toward one person in particular, Harry James Potter. The teen blinked in shock and surprise at this and couldn't help but suddenly becoming nervous. His family all inched closer to him as if protecting him from the entity. Jane had a look of panic on her face as she looked back and forth between her beloved brother and the entity. Jaya and Jason looked just as distraught as they looked ready to step in. Harry's friends were no better as they seemed ready to panic at the thought of losing him. Seeing the looks of fear and distress in the eyes of the many people present, Lady Magic smiled gently as she said in a calm tone, filled with amusement. Calm down, I'm not going to take him away from you. They all calmed down at those words and maybe sighed in relief as their shoulders relaxed greatly. Many adults knew that, if Harry was to be taken away, the girls present would all be heartbroken. I'm here to give him his birthday present, Lady Magic announced in a gentle tone along with a strange glint in her eyes. Harry's eyes widened in shock like everyone present in fact at those words, and softly asked in disbelief. Why? Why would you offer me, a mere mortal, a present? Lady Magic stared at him for a second before smiling slightly. Still the humble boy I watched over so many years ago. Good, and to answer your question, you are 11 now, child. It is time for you to claim what is yours. Many frowned in confusion at those words as they looked at the entity. Harry shot a glance toward his adoptive parents who returned it, wondering what Lady Magic was talking about. Ignoring the looks, the ghostly entity then waved a hand and a large appeared before her. Smiling, Lady Magic stared at it for a second before looking at Harry. As I said, you are 11 now. Normally, you have to wait until you are 17, but seeing that you are the last member of your family, you can claim them early. Claim what, milady? Rurika asked the entity with a frown and a hint of curiosity. His lordship's, was her answer. My what? Harry blurted out in shock as many stared back and forth between the boy and the entity with stunned expressions on their faces. Big brother is a lord? Jane asked the entity while giving a look of adoration and amazement at her brother. Harry opened his mouth to answer, but Lady Magic was quicker. Indeed, child, your brother is the heir of many wizarding houses, and because he is the last member of his family, he is their current lord. How many houses are we speaking of? Lilith asked with curiosity as the other girls all leaned forward to better listen to her answer. They weren't the only ones, as everyone single-person human and Momono's apart here did the same, their eyes shining with curiosity. Well, Harry here is the rightful lord of the following houses: Peveril, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Potter, and the heir of House Black, Lady Magic answered in a calm tone. Many gaped at those words as they stared at the embodiment of magic with shock and disbelief clear on their faces. But none were as shocked as Harry himself. Sure, he knew his father, James Fleamont Potter, was the head of the most ancient and most noble house of Potter, but he didn't know he was the head of several other houses as well. Many of the young ones, mainly Jane and the worm hatchlings, all looked at Harry with adoration and amazement, if the stars shining in their eyes were any indication. His parents were equally looking at him in shock but couldn't but being proud of him. His friends all looked at him with newfound adoration. Not only was he cute, handsome and knight-like in manner and had a dreamy physique for an 11 years old, the perfect boyfriend material in short, but he was also apparently pretty rich. A really nice bonus in their opinions. How do I claim them? Harry asked Lady Magic after a few moments of silence. The entity smirked before snapping her fingers. The dark-haired teen blinked when he felt something passing through his body and looked at the ghostly woman with confusion. "Look at your fingers," she merely said with some amusement. He did just that and gaped when he saw rings on his fingers. All of them had different shapes and jewels encrusted in them. "Congratulations. You are now officially the heads of House Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Potter and Peverell. Happy birthday." Lady Magic inquired him with a smile as she clapped her head in satisfaction. "Thank you milady for that and for everything else," Harry managed to say after a moment of silence. Lady Magic shot him a warm smile and a nod of acknowledgement before saying with a hidden smirk. "Back to topic, now that you are a lord, you would normally have properties, but seeing that you are not on Earth anymore you only have the money and the books left, which is still good." "How much do I have?" Harry asked nervously, while still a bit shocked to hear that he had properties back on his home world even if he didn't plan to return there at all. However, another part of him was excited at the prospect of new books to read. He wasn't the only one, as Raina and Lilith looked just as excited. Too many bad memories. Another smirk grew on Lady Magic's face, a predatory one that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present, especially at the one it was directed. The ghostly figure summoned a piece of paper and a large trunk before carefully handing the paper to him, commenting, "Fair warning before I take my leave, if you don't want to faint, I suggest you don't look. With that said, good day to you all." The entity said with a smirk before disappearing in thin air with a cackle. Hearing this, Harry felt dread inside as he looked away from the spot Lady Magic disappeared to look at what was written on the paper, only to fell backward with a cry of shock. "Arg!" Then he fell on his back, unconscious. Harry/son/big brother, his family and friends all cried out in shock as they rushed toward him. In his fall, he released his hold on the paper, which lazily floated in the air before being caught by Jason, as he and his wife had instantly rushed toward their eldest child after seeing him falling. The man took one look at the paper before fainting with a cry of shock. "Jason?" Jaya cried out in shock before picking the paper herself, wondering what could have shocked both her husband and son so much. The Jinko instantly froze as she gaped at what was written on the paper, her eyes wide in shock. "Mommy?" Jane called out to her mother with concern as she looked away from the unconscious body of her big brother alongside the others. "I have never seen so many zero in my life," Jaya commented in shock as she passed the paper to the closest to her, which happened to be Graphia. Needless to say that everyone was shocked by the amount of money Harry now owned, and some of them even fainted in shock just like our hero and Jason did. One thing was sure, it was one heck of a birthday. And one our hero will remember for a long time. October 31st, 1995, England, Hogwarts. "Let's hope my plan will work," Albus Dumbledore said as he stood in front of what looked like a goblet made of wood. 3 years had passed since he and McGonagall discovered the destroyed gadgets in his office, and things had been anything but good for not only them but the whole wizarding world. After seeing his destroyed stuffs, he and his deputy headmistress went straight to number 4, Privet Drive, where they discovered that Harry James Potter hadn't lived with them for a few years. Minerva McGonagall had been furious once she heard about their treatment against young Harry, and had been pretty noisy when she talked with the headmaster of Hogwarts. The old coot shivered each time he remembered that particular moment of his life. Worse, after punishing the Dursleys by cursing them to never feel warmth or safe wherever they go, they returned to Hogwarts to speak with the rest of the staffs, and needless to say that themselves minus Severus were shocked by this development. Albus, to be sure that his weapon was found, called his old comrade of the Order of the Phoenix so they could look for the boy. Sadly, it was in vain, and things had turned bad for the old coot. Why? Well, easy answer. When Harry's name wasn't called at the feast, one student, from Ravenclaw, had asked about it, and Professor Flitwick answered that the boy was missing before Albus could say something to save his face. The students, shocked by the news, sent letters to their parents, who in return, sent letters to the headmaster, demanding to know where their savior was. The Ministry of Magic and the Auror Department did investigations to know how the boy who lived and the vanquisher of the Dark Lord Voldemort had disappeared. Albus, after investigations, saw many of his posts being retired from him, such as being the chief warlock of the Wisingamot and the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards ICW. However, it wasn't the only reason of why he lost those posts. Indeed, it was discovered that he allowed an innocent man to be sent to Azkaban without a trial. The man's name? Sirius Orain Black, someone who had been believed to be the one who sold the Potters to the Dark Lord and caused their death. After the use of Veritasium on him, it was discovered that Sirius was innocent all along and that it was Peter Pettigrew, another one of James Potter's friends, who had betrayed them all. After some time, Sirius was acquitted while Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, made a warrant arrest for Peter Pettigrew. Albus had tried to speak with Sirius, but the new Lord Black had refused to talk to him, angry that the old man he looked up to, allowed to rot in the most dangerous prison in the world despite knowing he was innocent. The man became even bitter toward the headmaster of Hogwarts after he discovered his godson's disappearance. Back to Albus Dumbledore, the old man used all of his influence to still be allowed to be the headmaster of Hogwarts, but he was on thin ice as everyone in the ministry and the board of governors kept an eye on him for any mistakes. Which wasn't good for the old coot. Why? Because at first Albus wanted to use the Philosopher's Stone to lure Voldemort into the school so he could test the Potter boy, but seeing that the boy had disappeared he had to reshape his plans. The stone was destroyed by his creator, who had enough of living and just wanted to move on. The following years were not any better. First, children started to get petrified by someone, and after some research, the old man, with the help of his fellow professors, went to the Chamber of Secrets, blasting the entrance as none of them spoke Parseltongue, to confront the responsible person, which was discovered to be a girl named Ginny Weasley who was possessed by a diary. After a short fight with a basilisk of all things, Albus Dumbledore destroyed the diary and Flitwick died while killing the Snake King. Once it was all over, the diminutive teacher was honored for his bravery and was delivered an Order of Merlin. Albus had almost lost his position, but he managed to keep it, albeit he had to bribe a lot of people for that. The old man had cursed the world for what happened to him so far, as it was supposed to be Harry to endure all of this. The next year, the cat of a student, Hermione Granger, caught the fugitive Peter Pettigrew, who was hidden as a rat and pet of one Ronald Weasley. He was sent to Azkaban afterward, but, for some reason, he was killed before he reached the shore of the prison. Which angered many people, with Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, a friend of the former, at the head. Why? Because apparently, the guy had been given poison. Even now, people didn't know who killed the man. At the same time all of this happened, the elites of the wizarding world as well as the entire population had to deal with another big problem, an economical crisis. Apparently, Gringotts lost a huge amount of gold and decided to do drastic measure. Now, only small portions of gold could be taken from vaults. Needless to say that many people, mostly dark families, screamed in indignation at this, but the goblins would not back down. In the end, everyone in the wizarding world had to accept the changes, albeit reluctantly. After all, they recently finished a terrible war and the last thing they wanted was a new goblin rebellion. However, life had turned hard for the wizards and witches of England as the prices had literally skyrocketed. The cost of gold was now £30 to a galleon. For example, a school book that used to cost a few sickles before was now a galleon. The prices of potion ingredients were so high that a few could afford them. The most impacted were the Muggleborns, but even the purebloods felt it, even if they could survive. The Weasleys, despite being pure blood, were not rich and wealthy and were almost unable to pay for the children's supplies for school. It was mostly thanks to people like Dumbledore that they could still go there. The people who used to bribe others stopped doing so, as they all wanted to keep as much money as possible so they could still live like princes. Dumbledore himself was impacted by the high prices. Now it was no surprise to see him wearing the same clothes 2 or 3 times a week. The school itself was hit hard by the changes, and the staff was not amused as they saw their salary being reduced drastically by 20%. The meals were now terrible at school and many students complained about it, but sadly, they couldn't do anything and had to get used to it. The primary school of Europe was now in a pitiful state, much to the joy of their rivals. Speaking of rivals, that bring us back to present. The Ministry of Magic had decided to reinstall the Triwizard Tournament, a magical contest between the three biggest magical schools of Europe, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. The tournament was known for being really dangerous and by the death of many contestants in the past. Then why reinstalling it? To unify the magical schools of Europe and, in the Ministry's mind, to gain some financial support. But it was not the only reason. Dumbledore during the talk with Cornelius who came to him for some advices had been in favor of reinstalling the tournament as he planned to use it to summon back Harry Potter into his hands. He hadn't stopped looking for the boy but so far, nothing. It was as if the brat had disappeared from the face of the earth. With the use of a confundus charm on the goblet of fire and a piece of paper where he wrote Harry's name on it, Albus Dumbledore hoped that the magical artifact would bring back his missing weapon back where he belonged, under his thumb. Once the boy in his hands, he would modify the brat's memory so he could be what Albus wanted him to be and nothing else. That's bring us back to present. Shaking his head to regain his composure, Albus Dumbledore turned his head to look at the crowd of students before him. Well, the goblet is almost ready to make its decision. I estimate that it requires 1 more minute. Now, when the champions' names are called, I would ask them please to come up to the top of the hall, walk along the staff table, and go through into the next chamber. At the last part, the old coot pointed at the door behind the staff table, where they will be receiving their first instructions. It didn't take long before a first name appeared out of the goblet. Picking the piece of paper in his hands, the old wizard briefly looked at it before facing the students again. The Durmstrang champion is Victor Crumb. Cheers erupted in the crowd as the adults applauded. Then a tall, thin, sallow young man with dark hair and eyes stepped toward the door. Victor had a large, curved nose, a sharp profile and thick, black eyebrows. A few moments later, another piece of paper came out of the goblet. The Beauxbatons champion is Fleur Delacour. Not many cheers erupted from the crowd as a breathtakingly appealing witch with long, silvery blonde hair that fell to her waist, large deep blue eyes and fair skin went after Victor toward the door. She walked with grace and confidence, like a goddess among mortals. Then, again another piece of paper escaped the goblet. The Hogwarts champion is Cedric Diggory. The yellow table of Hogwarts went into an uproar of cheers as a tall and extremely handsome young man with dark hair and bright gray eyes bowed at them all before going after the other contestants with a smile on his face. Once Cedric disappeared out of sight, Albus Dumbledore looked back toward the crowd with a smile on his bearded face. Excellent. Well, we now have our 3 champions. I am sure I can count upon all of you, including the remaining students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, to give your champions every ounce of support you can muster. By cheering your champion on, you will contribute in a very real, the old man said before being interrupted by something unexpected. The goblet of fire had just turned red again as sparks were coming out of it. A second or two later, a long flame shot in the air, and, out of it, came a 4th paper. Dumbledore eyed the paper with hidden glee as he reached out to catch it, but then second his eyes read what was on it, he froze as a look of horror appeared on his face. What's the meaning of this, Dumbledore? Karkaroff the headmaster of Durmstrang roared in anger as he harshly picked up the piece of paper from his fellow headmaster's hands. Albus was still in shock over what he read on the paper and hadn't reacted at all. Ignoring the boos coming his way for his action against the great wizard, Karkaroff looked at the paper before looking back at the old man as he said loudly what was written on it. Albus Perceval Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. At the call of his name, the old man blinked a few times to regain his composure before looking around. He could see angry glares coming from Slytherin and the Hufflepuff students were also glaring at him. The Ravenclaw students were looking at him with mixed reactions while many Gryffindor students were cheering for him. Ignoring the look of disgust he was receiving from the other people present, Frenches and Bulgarians alike, Albus Dumbledore could only think about one thing. How could this have happened? Unknown to him, a certain spectral entity was smirking evilly at him, hidden from sight and pleased with what she did. Mysteria, Jaya's house, courtyard. At the same time, in the fantastic world of Mysteria, Harry James Potter was sparring against Gabrielle, his Griffin friend, under the eyes of Graphia and his little sister Jane. His adoptive parents, Jaya and Jason, went out to do their jobs and the Jinko asked her friend Graphia to watch over the kids as the Griffin was on her day off. Thankfully, Graphia accepted and she came along with her beloved daughter Gabrielle. Her husband, Gerald, couldn't come as he had been called by the local blacksmith for some works. Back to the Griffins, Graphia, once Jaya and her husband left, had decided to use this opportunity to test her apprentice and her daughter. Jane, of course, wasn't left behind as like Harry before her, she became Graphia's student. While Gabrielle and Harry were sparring, the former's mother was teaching some moves to the latter's young sister. Back to Harry and Gabrielle, they were having fun as they sparred together. The former was using his magic while the latter was using her claws. Under Esther and Graphia's tutelage along with Rurika's, he had attained a high level of knowledge both in combat and magic far above what a human should accomplish. Not only that, but the books he received from Lady Magic a few years ago also helped. He had allowed his magic teacher Esther and his friends to read them whenever they wanted and they had been really appreciative of this. Harry had blushed a lot when Raina and Lilith both kissed him on the cheek that day. He was just 11 back there. But things changed since that unexpected birthday. Harry and his friends Paralis, Gabrielle, Lilith, Raina, Hella and Cyrilla all grew even closer over the years. The girls had matured a lot more and no longer had childish bodies now, all 6 of them had bodies far more developed than they should. Worse, ever since they got the talk with their parents, all the girls knew that Harry was their husband and they were fine with it. Following his 11th birthday, they used every opportunity to flirt with the guy and it was very amusing to see him flushing in embarrassment when he was either pushed against a BRST or kissing on the cheek. The most flirtatious one was Hella, which wasn't a surprise really as she was the boldest of the group. It was a hellhound trait really. Gabrielle was not far behind but she had matured a lot over the years. While she was now calmer than before and relatively tamed most of the time, the young Griffin could still be exuberant sometimes. Speaking of which, she was the first one to have managed to steal him his first kiss. Many girls had been jealous that day and they all acted harder to get his attention much to the amusement of their parents. Of course, they got secretive talks about not doing too far as they had to wait until their target was ready and they all reluctantly accepted but that didn't stop them from wanting to gain Harry's attention. Our young hero had experimented a lot of things thanks to them. Gabrielle stole his first kiss on the lips. Lilith made him touch her peach which was the largest among the group of girls. Paralis had managed to put his head between her legs. Cyrilla had pushed his head into her melons and almost suffocate him. Raina had made him tickle her special spot. Hella well, she had almost gave him a BLWJB. In short, he had experienced a lot with his friends but he liked it regardless. Himself had been given the talk and he knew what his friends were doing but he let them be as he didn't want it to hurt their feelings. That's enough. Graphia called out to them and the 2 fighters stopped moving. Seeing that Jane was no more, it was easy to understand that the little Jinko must have finished her training some time ago. You both did great. Now, go take a shower and have dinner. At those words, they looked at the sky and indeed, night was coming. Nodding at the older Griffin, Harry started to make his way inside while Gabrielle stayed behind to look at his back. Why? Because if you looked closely, you could hear true feelings shining in her eyes, lust. Her eyes were filled with longing as she looked at the dark-haired young man's back. She wanted nothing more than to have her way with him but Graphia, her mother, forbid him to do it as Harry wasn't ready. The young Griffin knew what this meant after asking her mother and internally, she prayed the gods that it will happen soon. Something the matter, daughter? Turning her head, Gabrielle came face to face with her mother. She was so focused on Harry that she hadn't heard her approaching. She began to answer but was stopped by Graphia who had a look of understanding on her face. You don't have to justify yourself, my dear, you want him. I do, mother. My body is itching to have him inside me. The young Griffin said to her mother with a little whine. I can tell. Your lust is literally shining through your eyes, Graphia retorted with an amused raised brow. Gabrielle blushed a bit but replied softly, and yet, I can't still claim him. Feeling sympathetic toward her, Graphia putted a hand on her daughter's shoulder, saying gently. "Don't worry my dear, soon enough, you will claim your husband, you just need to be dash. I just need to be patient, I know that." "But still," the younger Griffin retorted with a pout. Graphia rolled her eyes with fond exasperation before saying, "Stay sharp little one, your wish might leak sooner than you think." With that said, the older Griffin left her daughter to her thoughts. What's that supposed to mean? Gabrielle thought to herself as she looked at the retreating form of her mother. Time skip. A few days had passed since that little Spar and Harry was invited at Graphia's home to have a sleepover with his Griffin friend. Jane had been a bit sad to not have her brother with her, but Harry promised her to pass some time with her once he came back. Graphia, Gerald, Gabrielle and our hero all shared a nice dinner, and barely a few hours later, they all went to their rooms as the moon was shining high in the darkness of the night. Gabrielle and Harry shared the same room a few years back. Our young wizard had used his magic to turn Gabrielle's single bed into a bunk bed. The young Griffin had been delighted by the idea, and since then, every time Harry would come to her house, there would be a bunk bed magically made. Of course, Gabrielle got the top bunk while Harry got the upper one. This had not changed since then. Anyway, the Griffin family and the humans all went to bed barely an hour and a half ago, and someone was having a really good dream. Gabrielle was laying on her bed, completely naked, and her right hand was fingering her nether regions. Of pleasure escaped her throat as she tickled her CLT. The young Griffin was dreaming about Harry and her having SEC together. She was dreaming about the feeling of his hands touching her melons as his PP rammed her PP repeatedly. However, the moment she and Harry were about to leak at the same time in her dream, of course, she suddenly awoke when her ears caught a sound. The young Griffin was a bit angry at having her pleasant dream disturbed, but then focused on the noise. Was she dreaming, or was she really hearing a mm? Blinking a few times, Gabrielle slowly crawled toward the edge of her bed before peering down to stare at the other occupant of the room. Her eyes widened by what she saw. Lying on the bed, his covers pushed aside, was a naked Harry James Potter. He was in his sleep, and she could hear him mumbling about something. But then her golden eyes landed on something else. Apparently, her dear Harry was having a really nice dream too, as his manhood was fully hard and irked. And what a PP! It was huge. Maybe around 8 inches at least. Even more surprising was the juice covering his chest and stomach. Without a doubt, she could tell that he had leaked all over himself in his sleep. At the sight of this, Gabrielle thought back to what her mother told her some times back. "You will know when he will be ready." A smirk grew on her face as she realized that what she had been waiting for had finally happened. Now, Harry was hers. Quickly but still silently climbing down her bed, the young Griffin slowly climbed Harry's before positioning herself above him. Without a word, Gabrielle licked her lips as she lowered her head down to lap the white substance off his body, and the young Griffin's taste buds were literally singing gospel as she got her first taste of Harry's juices. It was the most delicious thing she ever tasted in her life. The taste made her lick even more, as her entire being wanted one thing: to have this delicious juices inside her body, one way or another. The young Griffin had almost ate every drop of the white substance when Harry suddenly woke up. "Gee, Gabrielle," he gasped in surprise and embarrassment when he saw his friend, naked above him. Then a finger pressed on his lips stopped him. Harry, I have been waiting a long time for this, but now, you are mine." Gabrielle cooed at him as she positioned her clearly wet PP right above his hard PP. At the last word, however, she slammed her waist down, and the young Griffin in pleasure as she felt Harry's PP entering her PP, his tips tickling her CRVX. Harry gasped in pleasure when he felt his PP entering her warm and tight PP. For a few seconds, they stood like this, enjoying this new sensations until it all broke loose. Gabrielle's lips crashed against Harry's, pulling him into a passionate kiss as she began to move her waist up and down, riding his PP. In return, Harry began to move into her while using his hands to caress and pinch her tips. Gabrielle gasped in pleasure at this and began to move her waist faster while our hero used this momentum to do on her tips. Of pleasure escaped Gabrielle's throat again as she used a hand to push his head further into her breast. Harry in joy as he began to move harder into her, ramming her with his PP. Gabrielle had never felt so good before. Her mother had explained to her how it would happen, but she had never expected it to be so marvelous. The pleasure was overwhelming, and it was even more intense thanks to her love for Harry. I feel something coming," our hero suddenly cried out as he pulled his mouth away from her right NPL. Gabrielle, hearing this, knew what this meant and increased her pace, moving her waist even faster as she knew that herself was about to leak. Suddenly, the young griffin grabbed his hips and pulled him up hard, pushing his PP even deeper inside her, which resulted in having the start of his PP entering her WMB. Barely a second later, both teenagers gasped in pleasure as they both released themselves at the same time. The young griffin felt divine at the feeling of her vagina being filled with Harry's delicious and warm seed. A few seconds later, the two of them simply stood there with Gabrielle straddling Harry's sides and his PP still inside her. Both of them were sweating and panting a lot, but they both felt really good. "That was Harry began to say before a finger pressed against his lips, stopping him. "It was my love," Gabrielle cooed at him with nothing but love as she looked at him. "From this day on, you are my husband and I am your wife, you are mine and I am yours for the rest of our lives," the young griffin added lovingly before kissing him on the lips. Harry smiled at her before returning the kiss, his arms embracing her as their chests connected. With a wave of his hand, the bunk bed became a single one as it was obvious that they would be sleeping together now as husband and wife. 4 years later, Mysteria. The sun was slowly raising in the sky as a loud yawn escaped Harry's mouth as he woke up from a good night's sleep. Raising from his bed, he started to stretch his muscle before slowly getting out of bed. Harry James Potter was not a child nor a teenager anymore. Instead, he was now a handsome 5-inch 7-foot-tall 18-years-old young man. His oval-shaped face had high cheekbones, which gave him an almost sculpted shape. His emerald green eyes shined a bit with an intensity that would cause many to stare into them in admiration. His hair were long and he tied them into a short ponytail. He also had a slim but muscular body and strong muscles, a swimmer's build. His arms were pretty big thanks to the training he received from his combat teacher, Graphia. And sometimes his mother Jaya. Some scars could be seen marking his bodies. The whitish ones were a reminder of a dark past, while the others, he got them during his training sessions, were during his lovemaking with the loves of his life. Indeed, after that magnificent night with Gabrielle 4 years ago, the Griffin would use any opportunity to have some alone time with him. Of course, their parents didn't mind it, as the day following their private moment, a great celebration was held to celebrate Harry and Gabrielle's union. Lady Magic herself had been present for the occasion. Sadly, Harry had to face one terrible thing: jealous girls. Paralis, Hella, Raina, Lilith and Cyrilla had all voiced their jealousy, and one by one, they got their wishes to connect with the man they loved. Of course, he had to face the parents, and while they gave him their blessings, he knew that if he somehow hurt their feelings he will die slowly and painfully. Thankfully, his wives defended him before taking him to a room to cure a terrible itch. You know what this means. It was thanks to his magic that Harry had enough stamina to keep up, or else, he would have been dry with the amount of sex he had with the girls afterwards. Back to present, Harry released another yawn as he made his way toward his closet before opening it. The young man briefly looked at the items inside before picking them up. The only thing still inside were the clothes he left for this special day. The rest was in a trunk. Once it was done, he went straight toward the bathroom but had to stop as he bumped into someone on the way there. "Ow, hi big brother." It was none other than his beloved little sister, Jane. She had turned 10 years old barely a week ago, and soon enough, her childish body will become more mature and the little Jinko would be as gorgeous as their mother, Jaya. "Hi little one, slept well?" Harry asked her gently as he and her shared a brief hug. Hum, are you really leaving?" Jane asked her big brother with some sadness as she pulled herself away from him. Harry's heart broke at the fear and pain in his little sister's tone. He was 18 years old by law, he was an adult. At this age, young people must leave their parents to live by themselves elsewhere. Seeing that he turned 18 2 days ago, it was time for him to leave even if it pained him. He should have left the day before, but he and his family wanted one last day together before that. Gabrielle, Paralis, Hella, Reina, Cyrilla and Lilith had all understood his torment as themselves were facing it with their own parents. All of them wanted one last day with their families before they went on their next adventure. Harry had a lot of fun that day despite his heart being ready to burst out of his chest with the amount of pain and sorrow he felt at the mere idea of leaving the home he grew in for 12 years. Shaking his head to regain his composure, the young man looked down at Jane with a soft smile on his face as he said those words. "I have too, little one, but I promise to visit you whenever I can." "Promise?" Jane asked him in a tiny voice. "I promise," Harry retorted back warmly before kissing the little Jinko on the head. Jane giggled at the gesture before a voice called them out from the kitchen. "Children! Breakfast is ready. Coming mom." Jane cried out before hugging her brother one more time. "See you," she said with a giggle before rushing away. Harry watched her go with a smile before entering the bathroom. He still had to take a shower after all. A few minutes later, he came out of the shower as a fresh man. He was wearing a white shirt, a black cloak, blue pants and black boots. His black hair was well groomed and shined a bit under the light. With a sigh, he entered the dining room where he was greeted by the sight of his family sitting around the table, which was filled with jam pots, toasts, coffee cups and a large plate of waffles. In short, a delicious breakfast. "Hey everyone," he greeted them with a small smile. Jason and Jaya returned it, but you could clearly see the pain shining in their eyes. Jason hadn't changed much and looked like the same man Harry met years ago when his mother presented him to him. Apparently, when a male human had sex with a Momono and became a husband, they instantly became incubus, which Harry was since he first had sex with Gabrielle 4 years ago. Anyway, back to present, our hero made himself comfortable as he sat near his little sister, who was literally wolfing down as many waffles as she could. "Jane! Don't eat too fast or you will choke." Jaya hissed sternly at her daughter, who stopped eating to look at her with a red face of embarrassment and shame. "Sorry." Harry snorted in amusement at the little Jinko, who shot him a small glare in response. Jason had a grin on his face as he and Harry shared a look, but then they both focused back on breakfast. "Mom, your meals are as delicious as always," Harry said to the adult Jinko, who smiled back at him. "Thank you, dear, but my meals are nowhere near as good as yours," Jaya retorted back gently. "My food is not that good," Harry tried to protest but was stopped by Jane, who voiced her opinion. "They are. Except when you do vegetables." "Yuck," she pulled a face at the lost time. No one could retain themselves from laughing in amusement at those words, even Jane herself laughed. "Well, I think both of your cooking are good," Jason said calmly after a minute or two of hilarity. This comment earned him a kiss on the lips from Jaya, who whispered in his ear, "Thank you, love." "Anytime, my dear," Jason retorted back with a grin before the two of them shared another kiss. Jane made a face at this and Harry shot her an amused look, knowing that she won't be thinking the same in a couple of years. Afterwards, breakfast went smoothly as they discussed with one another. For Harry, it was an enjoyable moment, but like many good things, it had to end. Once they ate their meals, Jaya went back to the kitchen to wash the dishes with the help of Harry, who wanted to help her, which she accepted, while Jane and Jason were talking with one another, with the latter explaining to the former why Harry had to leave the familial house. Then, the fateful moment came. Harry stood in front of the entrance of the family house, being embraced one by his mother, father, and sister. First, he hugged his beloved little sister, whose face showed nothing but pain at seeing her older brother leaving. "I promise to come visit you soon, little one," he whispered into Jane's ears as he nuzzled the top of her head. "Please do," the little Jinko whispered back to him with tearful eyes as she looked up at him. "I will," he whispered back to her before kissing her forehead. Then, our hero hugged his adoptive father tightly and the older man returned the gesture. Jason, despite not being related by blood, loved him deeply and had clearly showed it to him during all those years they had lived together. "Take care of them for me," Harry whispered into the older man's ears as he pulled himself away from Jason's embrace. "I will take care of yourself, son," Jason whispered back as he patted the younger man's right shoulder with a hand. Looking at the older man with a pained smile, Harry then turned his head to look at the last person of his family. He was about to hug her when she lunged at him with her arms outstretched, pulling him into a tight embrace. Jaya was the most affected by the separation as tears were falling down her eyes, her arms wrapped around her eldest child. Ever since she found him alone in the forest 12 years ago, the Jinko had showered him with nothing but love and affection. Harry's own eyes watered as he hugged his mother back fiercely. He owned everything to the Jinko, as it was thanks to her that she was still strong and healthy. He would lay down his life for her without hesitation. The two of them stood like this for a moment as they didn't want to let the other go. After a few minutes, however, Harry and Jaya pulled away from one another with tears in their eyes. The Jinko then slowly extended one of her large paws to caress her son's cheek, using her thumb to brush a tear aside. "It pained me to see you leaving. I will miss you, my sweet little boy," Jaya whispered softly with nothing but pure pain. "I will miss you too, Mom. Thank you for everything," Harry whispered back with tearful eyes as he looked at her with nothing but love. "I love you, Mom," he added in a soft tone with a smile on his face. "I love you too, kitten," Jaya said back before the two shared one last hug. The embrace soon broke as they pulled away from one another and our hero picked up his trunk before looking at them again. "Goodbye everyone, I love you all, take care," he said to them with pain evident on his face. They wished him the same before they watched as Harry turned around before walking away with his trunk in his hand. Every seconds, Harry would turn around to look at them over his shoulders, but after turning a corner, they disappeared from sight. Seeing that he was no longer visible, Jaya, Jason and Jane re-entered their home where the two Momonos cried to their heart's content. Jason, himself, was shedding tears as he engulfed his wife and daughter into a comforting embrace. At the same time, Harry couldn't stop crying in sorrow as he walked through the streets, heading toward the front gates of the city. He felt nothing but pain as he moved further and further away from the home he grew up in and the family he loved more than anything. But a little voice in his heart was telling him that everything will be fine, his family will live as best as they could despite not having him around anymore. The day before, Harry had gave them a large amount of money from his own stash, and at first, Jaya and Jason had refused. However, after an hour or two, they reluctantly accepted when alongside the money, he promised to use his Patronus whenever he could so they could still have some news from him. As he walked through the streets toward the first level of the city, Harry's mind was filled with happy memories he experienced with his family, him and a younger Jane playing together, him and Jaya cooking, him and Jason sparring together. Shaking his head to stop moping, Harry took a deep breath before resuming his walk. The young man couldn't stop glancing around and couldn't help the smile from appearing on his face. While there weren't many people outside as it was still fairly early in the morning, we could still see some people walking around. There were a few Momonos as well, and, as he passed by, they would shot him stuck looks or cooing at him. Every girls in the city, especially who didn't have any husbands, had a crush on him because he was among the best-looking boys around, if not the best-looking boy. Of course, his wives, thanks Lady Magic they weren't here right now, would glare at everyone who dared to stare at him or trying to make a move. He remembered how Cyrilla had glowered at another Momono, she was a manticore by the way, for pressing her bums against his PP. Angered, the Chimera literally threw the manticore like a rag doll. And the rest had looked ready to lunge at her to tear her apart. A shiver passed through his body at the memory but quickly dismissed it to resume his walk. After a few minutes of walking, Harry stopped as he now faced the front gates that marked the entrance of Dark City. He briefly looked at the guards before his eyes landed on a group of Momonos standing a few feet away from him. They were none other than his beloved wives, Paralis, Hela, Reina, Gabrielle, Lilith and Cyrilla. At the sight of him, they all smiled warmly, but then it dimmed a bit at the sight of drying tears on his cheeks. Slowly, they approached him before gently embracing him into a comforting embrace. Harry smiled at them all before they pulled away from one another. Hey girls, he greeted them in a pained but happy tone. Hey love, they greeted him back in an equal tone. They had changed a lot since he first met them many years ago. All of them were no longer little kids but gorgeous momonos with bodies to die for. All of them had voluptuous bodies but with some differences. Reina had the biggest pair of bub of the group G-cups baby. Cyrilla also had a large chest E-cups and a really nice peach albeit not as wide as Lilith's. Paralis had the biggest thighs, she loved to trap his head between them, and a really muscular body. Lilith had the biggest peach of the group, which she loved to use to stuck him by rubbing it against his body, and had the body of a top model literally. Hella had the most athletic body of the entire group, she was a fast runner. Gabrielle, her, had not only large melons F-cups but also a large bum albeit smaller than Lilith's. However, what all of them had in common, was the fact that all of them were taller than him. Not that he cared anyway, as momonos were a bit taller than humans. Back to present, Harry took a moment to admire their bodies before opening his mouth to say in a soft tone. Are you ready? All the girls, hearing this, nodded their heads in agreement. A few weeks ago, they all thought about what to do when they reached their 18th birthday, and in the end, it was decided that they would try to find another place to build their home. While life in the city was good, they had to admit that it was still too crowded to their liking, so they decided to move away. Their parents had been a bit apprehensive at first, but even them had to admit that it was true. At first, they thought it would be nice to settle in Lana's village but decided against it. While they loved the Lamia dearly, they all knew that she would try to be with them as much as possible, or she would pester the girls for informations like how her nephew, Harry, was in bed despite being married. A big source of embarrassment for both the girls and Harry, in short. So instead, the little group decided to travel around to find a perfect spot to settle down and build a home for them. And maybe create a village of their own. It was Reina's idea, by the way. We should really get going. The longer we stay here, the hardest it will be for us to leave. Reina, the kind and wise Ryu, said to everyone in a soft tone as she glanced at the top part of the city. We should indeed, Cyrilla one said in agreement with a nod. I can't wait to finally stretch my wings again. Paralis said with some relief, but if you looked into her eyes, you could see the pain in them. And I can't wait to finally move. We have been standing there for hours. Hella complained in a whiny-like tone. Gabrielle snorted at this, while Lilith, Cyrilla and Reina all rolled their eyes in exasperation. Paralis, her, ignored it. We have been there for a few minutes, hell not hours, the succubus grumbled to the hellhound. Same thing to me, just like it had been ages since I had some fun with short, dark and handsome over there, Hella retorted, whole shooting a lustful glance toward the only man of the group. Gabrielle and the others girls all turned their heads to look at him with equal expressions on their faces. Harry, seeing it, silently gulped and quickly looked away to say in a hurried tone, all right gals. Let's go. With that said, the young dark-haired man with emerald eyes waved a hand and every luggages were shrunk to tiny size before they were putted in his pocket for safekeeping. Then, without saying anything, he slowly started to walk away. However, he had to freeze when Cyrilla too purred something that terrified him. Indeed, the sooner we found a place to settle, the sooner you can F us. Harry's face was covered with nervous sweat as he shot a look at the girls who all had lustful expressions on their faces. Gabrielle and Pyralis were rubbing their thighs while Reina was slowly pinching her tips. Lilith, her, had turned around to shake her peach a bit in a stuck manner while shooting him a grin. But it was the sight of Hella and Cyrilla licking their lips with predatory gaze that caused him to do one simple action. Nigerundeo. Harry cried out in panic with a pale face as he ran away from there as fast as possible. For a second, the girls stared at the spot where he previously stood, but then. Hey! Get back here, you! Hella hissed playfully as she rushed after him. Yeah. You won't escape us. Cyrilla too, the lion snarled in a lustful tone as she flied after the two. Lilith, Gabrielle, Reina, and Pyralis stared at one another with amusement before going after them with smiles of excitement on their faces. It was the beginning of their new life after all. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.